Thank you so much for tuning in to Circling Dialogos. If you are inspired by what we talk about on this channel and want to dive deeper and in fellowship with others, there's a number of ways you can do that. One is to become my client and work one-on-one with me. We also have circling events every week open to the public. We also do weekend intensives for circling every 4 to 6 weeks or so. And we have a year-long Art of Circling practitioner training program. We also have self-study programs that you can do at your own pace. All the relevant links, including my email, is below in the show notes. Please let me know if you have any questions.
You know that there was that thing that you just said before we started recording about this. It happened to be on that. What was it? What was the title of the essay that John wanted you to read?
Uh, Plotness is the one is pure relationality, I think is what it was
Yeah,
called.
yeah. And then you described, oh man, this is dense, right? Like it took you a month to kind of get through it. You're like, okay, but I'm gonna keep at it, right? Even though
Yeah.
there's so many tech, and it's right. He's like, if you're not familiar with like highly familiar with like platonic and neoplatonic terms, like you just don't even know what the hell he's talking about, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
these like pure pure abstractions, right? Like and you're like, wait a minute, what's the indefinite dyad again? What is that referring to? Right? Like all this stuff.
Yeah, which one was the noose referring to again? Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
But then,
going
then he
over.
stuck with it, right? He stuck with it.
Mhm.
And then you said by the end, he talked about how it all kind of came together. Every paragraph like crystallized. You could see the whole thing.
Yeah, and it was like you were looking through and at this paper at the same time.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're seeing like all these different patterns that he was laying out. Like this, he gave you this little piece of viewing the most fundamental thing as being relationality itself. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden, like the entire universe starts like clicking together into place.
Yeah.
This higher dimensional object that's like
Yeah.
it holds just so much more. And then you're walking around and all of a sudden like you find yourself thinking with those thoughts that he was talking about in that little paper. And yeah, it was a real trip to read.
Yeah. That experience, right, is it fascinates me of reading. And like you don't eh, like you're reading it and you're like, this I don't even know if I'm understanding any of it. And then you kind of keep pushing through, right? Like, and you have to tolerate not understanding so much, right? But
Yeah.
something's kind of like pulling you into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then something kind of like it, there's some, as if all the other parts was like some initiation you had to walk through.
Mm-hmm.
It gathers itself together, right? And the thing you were desiring, right, is somehow present in the beginning, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I have to say that that's one of the things. There's a few different things that have hit me recently that I've just been really going over and over and over again and kind of seeing it everywhere. Is this like how I kind of got into philosophy, right? And whenever anyone would ask me that question, first of all, it's one of those questions where I felt like I had to actually rediscover it again. Like I didn't really
Mm-hmm.
have a pat answer, but I never really was satisfied ever with my answer. Like I'm
Yeah.
like, oh fuck, I guess I don't know exactly, right? But then I thought about this is like it's I think it's because for better or for worse, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
my curiosity completely like exceeded my IQ. And
Yeah.
right, like and
Yeah.
thus I was reading things that my IQ couldn't handle, right? Like my Q would have
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
so big it just popped the eye out and then it didn't matter because there was no one to have the Q, or something like that, right? Like in plugging through Heidegger and but then and I had that thought kind of concurrently with I've been reading every morning I've been reading Meister Eckhart's sermons, like,
Yeah.
and if you time it just right with the coffee, it's like killer because he's basically kind of he's this like astute, right, mystic,
Mm,
Neoplatonic thinker, um, and practitioner, and he's laying it all out to a farmer and to peasants,
mm,
basically, right? So he's taking these kind of like really high level notions, right, and putting them in
mm,
language, right, that the farmer will understand, the peasant will understand,
mm,
and it's interesting because he takes you through these kind of examples and these illustrations that just kind of hit you between the eyes, right? And
mm,
and and one of them, he was talking about that it was something like it's impossible to behold God without being God, right?
mm,
The moment that you get to the point of knowing God, right, or beholding God, you have to be God, right?
mm.
And he
Yeah.
says that there's two powers though, um, that will get you close, but it still can't. They won't get you to be God, but they at
Mm,
least are able to disclose the unknowability of God, right? And he said the two powers of the soul are desire and intellect, right?
yeah.
And what he says is that, like, both of them won't reveal God to you like an object, right? But like
Mm,
desire is closer than intellect. In other words,
mm.
desire is closer to God, right, than intellect. He's referring to like ontological categories, if you will, like
Yeah.
not necessarily like your subjective desires and
Mm,
your personal intellect. And that really hit me. I was like, wow, that is something in that. He put language to something that I have been on some level wrestling
mm,
with, right? Has been a mystery to me. Is this that we can desire what we can't know,
yeah. Yeah.
right? Like that's really a trip. Like you would think you'd need to know about the thing. Like it had to be knowable in some way for you to then desire
Yeah.
it. There's something about desire that actually reaches in to these kind of
Mm,
like inalienable horizons, right? That ultimately are anonymous, right? At some deep
mm,
level, right? But at the deepest level, desire is desiring for that, and that'll bring it closer than
mm.
anything else.
Yeah.
And so,
What I'm hearing with that. Oh yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, that's yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Like what I'm hearing with that is that there's this like I've had really similar experiences. Like I found myself, like a year or two ago, like watching like physics lectures from Harvard,
mhm,
and like these guys are up there and they're writing these equations on the board, and I don't know what a single symbol that they're drawing up there means, or and half the words that they're saying, like they almost sound like English, but it's not quite. And
yeah,
like I found myself watching hours of those, like with no idea why, because like you're not like I can't even justify to myself that like I'm subconsciously understanding it because there's so many words I have no context for.
yeah,
But like there's something in watching that. It's like it's calling something out of you,
yeah, yeah,
and that shows up in these different spaces. But then like you go a little bit deeper into that feeling, like into watching that listening,
yeah,
and like what I've been seeing is that there's this like how do you even put it into words? It's like you don't even know what the thing is that you're looking for, but you still feel called towards it, and the thing inevitably shows itself if you stick on that path.
yeah, yeah,
And so there's a part of you that knows what's there
yeah,
without seemingly any logical connection between you and that thing. And
yeah,
there's like that deep like erotic drive
totally.
towards that thing. And it's like I think if you do it right, like you have this eros pulling you forward,
Yeah.
and your logos kind of like follows along with it, like in tow, and it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's spooky. And like I don't know, like there's like so many deep questions, like just sitting inside of that that you
I
can,
know.
yeah, get lost inside that for hours.
That's it. I mean, I think you're right. There's this, it's an erotic, it's the eros is what catches you, right? Or
Mm,
catches it or whatever, catches your own logos, right? And draws you in.
mm,
But it's not the logos, it's as such. It's like, it's
yeah.
eros, right? That it's got to, and so many of the dialogues are about, like, you
Mm,
realize the drama of them are, basically Socrates, like, like creating the conditions of the possibility for you to start to
mm,
desire that, or for the arrow
yeah, yeah.
to hit, right? um that is, yeah, that is such a mystery to me. And
Mm,
you think about it, like, in some sense, there's, in the Christian sense of the word, it's it's the it's the eros, that you're supposed to totally love God, and then what
mm,
folds back is agape, right? Which
mm,
is this mutual person making, right? And this
mm,
meeting of God as person, which is just such a, I don't know, I just really have the hardest time getting my hands around that part of that,
yeah.
right? God is person. There's some mystery there that, like, is so seducing,
Mm,
but, like,
yeah, 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 yeah.
there's something so seducing about that, just that it's a person, but yet it's this ineffable, like,
Mm,
apophatic thing, right? And so,
yeah.
well, I've also just noticed too that I would say this 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 keeping this, I don't know how we put it, keeping that desire alive, right?
Mm,
And the disclosure of the deepest horizon, in some sense, right? That sense of things, when it's open, everything feels animate to me,
mm,
right? My life makes sense, like, in ways I can't describe. Everything's filled with
yeah,
meaning. And when it's closed to that, it's the inverse of that. It's probably like,
yeah.
when I am not minding, or that horizon
Mm,
isn't isn't calling to me, right? It's That's hell for me. That I suffer
mm,
more.
yeah.
And you can boil down to, like, it's, yeah, it's like, it's suffering when that's not open in that way.
Mm, yeah.
And that's the other thing I've noticed about that. Like, it's like a real personal thing
Mm,
of, like, when that's alive, when I'm, like, reading something, or I'm something's disclosing the thrill of that kind of
mm,
mystery, right? That
mm,
there's a pulling forward, right? And an animation that is in everything, that kind of folds back when that's
mm.
gone, or I'm out of contact with it for whatever reason. And I don't know if it's up to me or not, right? About whether that's open to me, right? I wanted to be
Yeah, yeah.
right, so that I can control it, right? But, like, then it probably wouldn't be what it is. But that
Yeah, yeah.
is the bottom of my suffering in my life, is when that horizon is not substantiating me.
Mm. Like I feel like attention plays into that where like I feel like you're right. There's like I can 100% agree with the hell part. The hell being you're closed off from the
Yeah,
world. Like you're inside your own head. You're not like being called out from yourself in any way. You're just kind of like sitting and you're ruminating
yeah,
with, your own thoughts, which are always like way more lame than you think that they are. And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and there's this man, I'm like I'm having a hard time finding any words for it right now.
Hmm. Take your time. I hope you're enjoying this video so far. Just wanted to remind you, if you are interested in diving deeper in what we talk about here on the channel, in fellowship and in a more embodied way, there are a number of relevant links in the show notes, including working with me one on one as a client. All the information is below, including my email address.
Yeah, there's that calling forth is like that there's that thing that's like outside of you that's calling you forward and you're moving towards it. And there's that thing that you're moving towards that you can never see. And you never know what's going to be calling you out of yourself.
Yeah.
But you can like try to find where it is, like in like just it's the vaguest sense
Yeah.
of directing yourself towards that erotic pull. Because like by definition, you can't know what you're being directed towards, but you can kind of see the signs coming in that are leading you down that path. And I think that what that is fundamentally is curiosity.
Yeah.
And there's this other like there's this layer that I'm like struggling with because you can't choose what you're going to be curious about.
Yeah.
You can't choose what's going to like explode your mind with wonder out of nowhere. But at the same time, it feels like curiosity and wonder is a disposition that you can cultivate within yourself
Yeah.
and which guides and makes that process smoother. Like
Totally.
I think my coworkers get annoyed at me sometimes because like I'll come in and like we'll like have a bubble wand and I'm like, you guys ever just thought about how crazy bubbles are? And then like
Yeah.
you sit there and you play with it, and then
Yeah.
there's inevitably something cool comes from doing that.
Yeah.
Or like trying to imagine like sitting and trying to imagine like what the air looks like if you
Yeah.
could see it, like when you wave your hand through it, like what would that look like?
Yeah.
And there's this playfulness and like this lack of seriousness
Yeah.
that comes from being in that space
Yeah.
that like it
Totally.
takes you out of yourself and it yeah, but I can also feel at the same time there's that part of you that's like trying to contract and stick into itself and doesn't
Yeah.
want to let you go.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. It's funny. There's something about this that's like, you know, it's interesting too because there's probably some relationship going on with, because it's like we're talking about desire, right? And we can desire
Mm.
things, right, that are just,
Yeah.
addiction being the like the epitome of that, right?
Mm.
Of desiring something just self closes, right, in a certain sense. So it's
Mm.
like it's ripe with the possibility of um like ideology of
Mm.
what's that term, idolatry, um
Mm.
and so and it's interesting because I get the sense it's when that's really open for me, right, where there really is nothing I can kind of totally grasp onto and hang
Mm.
onto. Like it's like not
Mm.
desiring an object, right?
Mm.
It's like it's present to the disclosing, right? But the thing that becomes present in the
Mm.
disclosing in that moments where I feel most related to is actually the concealment as such, right? The
Mm.
concealment that's disclosed with the disclosure. And it's like when I'm participating in that, right?
Mm.
Like everything, like the deeper meaning of everything is implicitly perceptible. Like I don't even have to think about it. I look at my son and he glows,
Yeah.
like he glows of it, right? There's this kind of connection
Yeah.
with this tuning into it, right? Tuning into the
Mm.
right thing in some way, which I think is something that you're talking about with attention. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. There's a like I always feel crazy sharing this with people, but the there's like almost a visual sensation that happens like when life is showing up to you in that way,
yeah,
where like the disclosure is becoming evident and like the inherent meaningfulness of everything is kind of shining forward. Where there's like it's like right behind the thing I'm seeing, it's like there's this golden flame that's like illuminating everything from behind.
right,
And if you can pay it's so difficult because if you can pay attention to that flame
yeah,
a little bit more than the object that's like immediately preceding it,
yeah,
then you're called forward more perfectly
yeah,
into that space. And
Yeah.
like there's this changing that starts to happen. And like the first time I shared it with anybody, I'm not quite sure why I'm feeling the need to share this, but it was with a philosophy professor that I had.
Yeah.
I managed to finagle my way into his medieval philosophy class, even though I had none of the prereqs. And
Right.
so, and he's a like he went over and he showed us all these the Cappadocian fathers, and we read Saint Macrina and Gregory of Nyssa, and these giants of philosophy. And
Yeah.
like he gave me this like some papers on the energy versus the energy versus essence distinction,
Yeah.
and how that kind of works in with God and all of that, and working in that space. And so I told him about it, and he's like, I know what you're talking about. Keep following that.
Yeah.
And that led into, more of these saints, and they talk about like, being filled with this golden light.
Yeah.
It's like it's this purifying flame in a sense. And I feel like that's on the outside. And if you can pay attention to it and like catch the flickerings and the glimmerings, the
Yeah.
closer you move in towards it, like the more you start to feel like burning within your own soul.
Yeah.
Because whatever that thing is starting to kind of enter into you. Like you're taking on that energy
Yeah.
from, God, for lack of a better word. And you're being filled with that. And it's like this purifying, this driving force that like lets you see more clearly and hear deeper. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Totally. It's really it's interesting to think about this too. Like religions on some level are is in some levels like practices and trainings and wanting what you don't know, right? Like it's interesting. Like it is this, I mean, in some sense, that's a lot of what religion, I think, does or traditionally does, right? This where it's kind of like without that, like, it's you got to get clear on what you want and like as clear as you are on what you want, like all of that kind of stuff, right? But this minding of what doesn't appear but maybe glimmers
Mm.
or noticing how everything hangs together, but like the hanging as such is like
Mm.
behind it, right? And yeah,
Mm.
these ways of attuning attention. I think this is what we're doing in Dialogos, right? At
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
right is we're enacting, as John would say, the machinery, right, of transcendence, right?
Mm.
Like, and that as you enact that, right, something kind of catches. But it is a
Mm.
real strange thing because there is this element of grace to it, right? That
Mm.
that because when it catches, it's you can't really say that's it caught as a function of some skill, right?
Mm.
Like it wouldn't be what it is if it was, right? You can't say it's kind
Yeah.
of like I think the same thing about listening. Like when listening is something that happens to us, right?
Mm.
But like I can't really say that like that listening experience was produced by me. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right, there's some leap there, right? There's some leap going on that's essential to that, right? But I think maybe what the practice is like tolerating the postures of turning towards what you can't know, right?
Mm.
And going through the reverential postures, right? In some
Mm.
sense, like that mimic that machinery, right? That makes it
Mm.
more liable for it to catch you or something like that.
Yeah. And then once you're caught, you're inside of it. You don't have to worry anymore until you eventually inevitably kind of fall back out of it. But then you kind of go through that same process and that same procedure again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm feeling what you're saying. There's that leap. I like the listening metaphor a lot, where you like you I've heard you say that the first step in listening is to notice that you're not listening.
Yeah.
And it normally like that's like even that though, like that's kind of given to you. It's like the noticing that you're not listening isn't something you can trigger in yourself. Otherwise you would have been listening already. It's like a fun little paradox. But
Yeah.
like once you're sitting, like once you notice that you're not listening, you you do the thing where you're like, okay, I'm here, I'm paying attention to you now. And you do the mindfulness thing where you start shutting off all the other thoughts and everything, and you really focus in with this person that you're talking to.
Mhm.
And then, you know, for a while, like that's all you can manage is just like just trying. And you're not really listening because you're trying to listen.
Yeah.
But then eventually that opens and it expands out into you just find yourself listening,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's effortless, and you're inside that space, but there's that tunnel that you have to go through,
Yeah.
that yeah, that bottleneck, and what like the nature of that bottleneck and what that is. It's yeah, that's a yeah.
That's the thing. Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, and I noticed like kind of I think psychologically, it's funny because it's like it's it's oftentimes what, in some sense it's like kind of in some way getting curious about that you're not curious,
Mm,
right? Like there's always this kind of thing with me where it's like I'm suffering about something and I'm about as interested in suffering about it as like eating tinfoil, right? And at some point I start suffering enough and I'm like, all right, like, and I got to turn towards this thing, right? Like turn
mm,
towards the vagueness or the nullity or the emptiness or whatever it is that
mm,
feels like, you know, worse than hell. And then there's
mm,
this kind of whole process, I think, of you know, turning towards it, like getting into relationship with it and like being willing to at least have a curious stance towards it, right? And you have to kind
mm,
of like it's like in some sense you kind of you reach into your own hopelessness and you like kind of look at it with eyes of hope or something like that. And
mm,
that so many times those have been the biggest kinds of openings, right?
mm,
That have happened for me is precisely this you could say the loss of contact with that horizon, right? And the pain
mm,
associated with that, right? Like the very
mm,
pain and looking at the pain and opening it up and seeing kind of like the distortions of it.
mm.
And like you go through this process of like, why am I holding on and contracted like this? And like you
Yeah.
go, right. And then all this stuff kind of happens and then boom, something kind of shines through. It's like even
Mm,
in some sense, psychologically, it's this turning towards what has you turn away from it, right? That kind of can unfold it, and it catches again,
mm,
right? The thing you metabolize the truth that you see, you kind of like have this experience of letting go, and I mean,
mm.
that's always like that. I just see that over and over in circling, right? It's kind of like that's why we talk about it. It's like the intention of circling is the practice of profoundly being with what is, right?
Yeah.
What is like disconnection and suffering, and we kind of like turn towards it and be with it, right? And
Mm,
the more that you can be with it, right? There's some dynamic within that very thing, right, that starts to show itself, right?
mm.
Over and over and over again.
Yeah. And then there's the initial process, like the initial trusting process, I feel like where you're like when you're in the state of full curiosity, you don't have to worry.
Yeah.
You're like you're in that flow, you're one with you're in pure relationality with the one, you're doing that thing, but then you drop back down and you're in that trough again.
Yeah.
And there's the immediate hope that you have to start expressing,
Yeah.
where you express like that there's a way out, hopefully.
Yeah.
You hope for the way out,
Yeah.
and that margin of hope which is given to you in some sense is what allows you to redirect your attention back into the thing that's going to raise you out of that trough, out of hell.
Yeah.
But then, you know, you go through that process enough times.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what you're saying. It's like it always comes and it goes.
Yeah.
But I feel like after a while there's this thing that happens where you start to recognize where you are in the cycle,
Yeah.
and knowing that it's a cycle instead of hoping that you'll come out of it
Yeah.
somehow encourages you in a deep enough sense where you're able to delve deeper into the trough than you normally would have gone. And
Totally.
you gain the insights and you're transformed more there in the bottom, and you bring that back up out with you.
Yeah.
And there's this, yeah, and there's that secondary level to it. And that's,
Totally.
yeah.
I think that's a kind of a description of wisdom, isn't it? That sense of so there's these waves that you're subject to, right?
Mm,
And but like over time you go through enough of them, right? You
mm,
realize like versus when it's just this, so you're at the bottom and that's everything, and you feel like
mm.
that. You start to recognize that like that's not the only thing going on here. There's another thing that's going up, and you can kind of get this sense, and therefore
Yeah.
like I know like if wisdom is knowing what to pay attention to, they're the most important thing to pay attention to. It sounds like that's starts to
Mm.
sound like wisdom.
That feels right. That feels right. And yeah, like when I'm at work and I'm talking to people, you know, people are going through their ups and their downs, and you know, they inevitably come.
Yeah.
And you know, like at the bottom of it, almost everybody there's some really common things that you hear,
Mhm.
which is like, I can't do this, like this is too much, I can't handle it, like I wish I wasn't here anymore, like I just want this to all go away, like how am I going to keep going, you know, that despair kind of starts to show through. And like aside from just sitting there with them and listening, I found like one of the very few things that's actually helpful to remind them of is like, if this is the worst you've been through, like you've already been through it. Like,
Yeah.
you know, this is like you're inside of it right now, and you keep moving forward from moment to moment, which means you're already doing it.
Yeah.
And for some people, that's enough of a frame shift to kind of start to break them out,
Yeah.
and then they can kind of start to, you know, crawl back up that mountain again.
Yeah. Totally.
And and I think that a lot of like what I get to do for my job, which is just so beautiful, is that if you're right, and this is like being able to follow those ups and downs as wisdom, it's just pointing people towards the directionality of that flow
Yeah.
of like, if this is the worst you've ever been, like be grateful for that, because you know you can only get better from here.
Yeah. Totally.
And guiding them back into the place where they can see themselves from a more courageous lens,
Yeah.
from a place not of like, I can't do this, but I've been doing this.
Yeah.
And something about just like that frame shift, like it connects people in with this deeper wisdom that they have for themselves,
Yeah.
and it orients their direction back to where they want to be going, and then they flow with themselves and they get out of it on their own.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
yeah,
It's like you
and
wake. It sounds like it's like you wake. It's like it wakes you up to the always already underway of
mm,
it, right? That you don't somehow in your dreading of it, you don't recognize that you're already at the bottom, right? In some sense,
yeah,
like you're still here talking about it. So it's like this is about you're already doing it. Yeah,
yeah,
I could see how that could start to like ground could start to be caught there. There's
yeah, because it's like,
dignity in it.
yeah, even if it's like the worst place to stand, like at least you're like, you got ground under your feet again, and you can start walking.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah, and like what I'm starting to kind of see like is that there's there's a sense in like where the conversation went. It's like this, like that was a like that's a like a single example of like, you can talk to somebody and you can watch them inside of it, and you're like, oh no, like you're going to be okay, like it's a cycle and you're going to get out of the cycle and you're going to be better for it. And
hmm
you can kind of help them and guide them through that,
yeah,
and you can be the person in the sense that like kind of helps to turn their attention
yeah,
towards what's more beautiful.
yeah, yeah,
But then like what starts to show up is like, well, who's doing the turning for me then? Like if there's not another person telling you to do that, but it happens for you, like
yeah,
where, like from where is that turning? Like where is,
yeah,
like what is it in being that turns you that turns your attention, that turns your curiosity back to where it needs to be. Like we're like
Yeah.
that grace that comes on you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. That's interesting. Yeah. And it's like, it's interesting to think about wisdom in this, right? Because on one level, wisdom is so paradoxical. Like it's like that thing no one no one can possess, right? Like
Mm.
it's like past, like I think the metaphor in one of the dialogues is like it's like the water passed from, like bucket to bucket to bucket, right? It can't belong
Mm.
to anybody, right? But it flows through everything. Like it's like somehow wisdom affords something like, what is it? There's some there's some kind of connection with like that turning and wisdom, right? Like
Mm.
because there are ways that where it's like you can, as you were talking about, there's ways in which that turning seems like it can become more available, right? In some
Mm.
way. Like, but it's not, yeah, it's not one of those things of like where I like when I turn, it's a function of like this great skill that I just had, right? But there's something like it seems like there's a vulnerability to it, to the turn,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
But yeah, the turning is it's like, yeah, it's there's something really mysterious about that. Like I like the way that you put that too. Speaking of mystery, my son just came home. Bye bye. There you go. 1 second.
You're good.
Just that was my son. Um, the what was I going to say? That yeah, like that sense. In some sense, I like how you put that. Like as an other to the person, you're able to kind of point and have them
Mm.
like, which affords them the possibility of turning, right?
Mm.
It's really strange because you can point like, and they can turn on some level, but it doesn't necessarily
Mm.
mean they're going to see it, right? Because I'm sure
Yeah. Yeah.
we have examples of pointing right to one person, they see it, right? It changes everything, and you point to the other person, they're like, I don't see anything, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't,
And then
right? But then there's that pointing that has one turn, and the question
Mm.
is like when no one's with you and it turns, right? What is it that's doing the pointing?
Yeah. Yeah. That's I think the easy answer would be to say that it's God,
Yeah,
or that it's that it's mm, the mental the image that just came up is a compass. There's a there's the inherent directionality that you're always aligned with. No matter where you put the compass, it's always going to point north. And maybe it's
yeah,
I don't know. It's like you're reorienting back towards that point on the compass that you're always directed towards, and it's because it feels like a realignment. Because when
yeah,
you're in the depths of despair
yeah,
and you're like you're inward focused and you're looking at yourself and you're struggling with these thoughts that aren't that interesting, it's you're not actually you're facing south when you should be facing north in
yeah,
that situation.
yeah,
Maybe like you said something about that where it's like eventually you get to a point where you just get annoyed with yourself.
yeah,
That I've been circling with these same thoughts for the longest time now, and I'm done with the beauty of the suffering. I've suffered enough. Now I'm just kind of done. I kind of want to be
yeah,
out of it.
yeah,
And
totally.
then you give up, you let it go, and then there's something in that letting go that like puts that points you back north,
Yeah,
and then that turning shows up. But even then, it's like like your attention has to be like has to be given back to the the thing that was pointing north, and
yeah,
yeah, it just yeah, it's like I feel like I'm feeling like I'm chasing this. I'm chasing the thing that's doing the turning, and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't find it. Yeah.
There's something about it strikes me about this. Uh it's really interesting, and I think it connects to what we're talking about. Um so that I forget what his name was, but there's the guy that wrote a bunch of books about Corbin, Henry Corbin, who's the suit. He's the Corbin's the one that came up with the notion of the imaginal, right? That John talks about a lot.
Yeah.
And he did a kind of class. It's online. It's like it's really good.
Mm.
And he's really peculiar and funny and eccentric, and like so it's fun kind of listening to his lectures because he's stumped through half of it and he's trying to work. It's great. But he was trying to talk about this. Actually, it's funny enough. It's this sense of that he was saying, like for Corbin, right? The first and final fact, if you will, right,
Mm.
is everything is a person.
Mm.
Like to understand Corbinian or Zoroastrian Sufist cosmology, right, is for Corbin
Mm.
is everything is a person. And he
Mm.
spent a whole lecture, and that was just so opaque. He could not get underneath it, right? He's like, okay, what is he really saying? Like, what does that mean? The person. And you could tell he was like lacking some kind of foothold into it. And then
Mm.
the next week it comes on. I think it was like a week later or something. All these are recorded a year ago or something like that. And he comes on and he kind of went on this whole ride that next week. And he ended up um, recalling the work of an anthropologist who was, I think, studied really prolific anthropologist. I forget what his name is, where he was looking at he didn't use the word person, but he used the word animation, the
Mm.
animating of the world, right?
Mm.
And in some sense, you could say that you know modernity really stripped out, right, the
Mm.
animation of the world, right? Like
Yeah.
we really have a distinction between inside, outside, animate,
Mm.
inanimate, right? And these definitions for all of those, and those are so deeply embedded in our in our axioms, right? In our
Yeah.
categories of thinking as a Western person. And so there's these whole series of projects, right, where on some level you see these thinkers who are trying to not not go back to this sense of aliveness and animation, right, of the world,
Mm.
right? Um, but go forward with it in some sense. Like,
Mm.
how can we begin to approach this sense of animation of even, like it's easy for kind of people. It's like a little less easy, but pretty easy for pets, right? We can kind of
Mm.
think about persons, right, as these things being
Yeah.
persons in some way. Starts getting a little more difficult when you're talking about plants, right? But you can kind of like look at it just right and like maybe see this. But man, you start
Yeah.
to get to a rock, right? And you're like, how is that a person, right? And so he's going
Yeah.
like, what the fuck is he talking about? Everything in the final with person, like how the hell do we even think about this? And
Yeah.
what the guy said, right? The anthropologist said was this. He's like, so it's not like the the in the ancients who saw the world as is an animating person, right?
Mm.
It's not that they had beliefs about things in the world, right, that
Mm.
we have, right? It's not like they had some belief that rocks were a person or something like that, right?
Mm.
But they were in some sense came to being already with a pre-thematic understanding that what's animate is below, right, is ontologically prior to all of these other distinctions, right?
Mm,
So it wasn't like a rock is a category that belongs in person, right? It
yeah.
wasn't like they had beliefs about that, right? It's prior to all of that, right? Being itself was something like an animating, right? That was prior to all
Mm,
of that. And so therefore, when they looked out at the world, it peopled, it personed, it communicated because they
mm,
were in touch with this deeper ontological,
mm,
pre-thematic sense of things. Um,
mm.
I forgot, like in describing it, I forgot what all of that was. I was trying to link that to. Do you remember what I was linking that to? There was the turning. Where were we?
Yeah, it was I don't remember. There's like earlier in the conversation you were talking about how
Yeah.
like you were thinking of God as a person and how that felt like you were dropping into that, and this it feels like you were kind of coming and circling back to that almost in a sense,
Yeah.
unless I'm wrong.
Yeah. 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 I'm thinking about like in some way, I'm wondering because in some ways I think that is that sense of we could say a big part of the meaning crisis is like that
Mm,
disenchantment with the world, right?
mm,
Like so there's something really alluring, right, to me. And
mm,
I think it comes from this kind of loss of that sense of animation, right? But it was really striking to me the way you put that it's not like we have to go and believe that the rock is a person. It's more like we are connected to something that's before any of the categories of rock, right? That then
mm,
like has things hang together in such a way that it speaks to you and addresses you. And I would
mm,
imagine there's something along here in our first conversation where you talked about, one of the things that really like struck you on these walks is the sense of the thou of the world. The world is a thou,
mm,
right? And there's that sense, right, that I think is also that sense that when the mystery is open to me, right, and speaking to me, I think that's what I experience, right? Is
mm,
like everything effortlessly shows itself and
mm,
addresses itself in the appropriate way, right? Like
mm,
when something like that is cut off from me, everything shows up as kind of like surfaces without any forms in them,
mm, mm,
something like that. And so like there's this kind of, I would imagine this turning. And Heidegger talked a lot about that, right? The turning, right?
mm,
Of there's some there's some kind of mysterious ontological turning that goes on. That turning has something to do with that deeper sense, that deeper kind of ontological sense, like a
mm,
remembering of that, a restoring of that, a seeing. And I also think it's like there's also the sense of the missing of it, right, is actually the seeing of it, right, in this way, right?
mm, mm. The missing of it is actually the seeing of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
mm,
Yeah, that drifted off nicely.
yeah,
Yeah, the yeah.
yeah. And there's that kind of sense where, in some way, like I would imagine that's where, some of the postmodernism stuff in some sense recognizes the missing of it, right? However, it's the missing of it, they then maybe conclude that there's no it. There never was an it. And thus everything becomes a kind of like horizontal pluralism or something, right? Power dynamics or something like that. But I think it's like there is that sense, and this kind of, I would imagine, is where it comes back into our suffering, right? In some way. Like in turning towards the suffering is something like you're turning towards the absence, right? Of it, right? But there's something about like being able to recognize the absence presupposes something else that is also in some way in view of that, right? And I imagine that there's something about that that is like why compassion, right, is usually kind of synonymous with wisdom, right? And compassion always involves the awareness of suffering, right? Yet it's this strange thing, right? Like to really think about compassion, it's really striking, right? Because like the Buddhists talk about like just basically look at your suffering, like get that it's like almost like a uh somehow experiencing and opening and turning towards another suffering. I get the universal suffering of all beings, and therefore I get all beings. That is somehow like trans rational and goes through all of that, which compels me to in some sense bring that very that very thing that's suffering a kind of quality of love, right? That is usually compels me into action and service and all of these kinds of things, right? But this kind of link between the suffering, right? As like, there's that way where you're suffering and you're completely cut off, right? And you kind of suffer about your suffering, right? Which is like, and then what, like you go and do meditation and you're like, you know, when you actually just with your suffering, it's actually you could start to experience as just like different kinds of glitterings and things, right? There's another right. There's a you start to realize that like a lot of your suffering was actually a suffering about the suffering, right? But when you actually like turn towards the suffering, right? There's something out. There's something that happens through that, right?
Yeah, and I think it's easier to do that for other people than it is to do it for yourself initially.
Yeah.
Where when you're watching somebody suffer because of like from their own suffering, you're like, okay, you're doing a lot right now. You can be doing a lot less.
Yeah.
And it's like the pattern is so clear watching it from afar. And but it's really difficult to do it for yourself. And I think that's I don't know, there's like the compassion piece is really interesting to me right now, where when it is possible again, like to show yourself compassion, like when you're in dire straits.
Yeah.
And there's I think we've all heard stories of like people like you just come to the realization on your own somehow, like without any external aid. You recognize that you're suffering needlessly. You do the turning, like you're pointed back towards where you want to be going, and you allow yourself to heal, to keep moving forward, and to move forward.
Yeah.
And there's that self compassion where you start seeing like you're conversing with yourself in some sense.
Yeah.
You turn yourself and then you move out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that process is a lot easier when you're with somebody else. And when you're in the dire straits, it's like there's a part of you, even if like you would always deny it. Like when you go and visit somebody who's sick, they never want you there.
Yeah.
Except until you let them know it's like, no, I'm here. And then they kind of melt. And then they're just grateful that you're there.
Yeah.
And so I think we all want that desperately. We want that person to come and show compassion to us.
Yeah.
And but there's a difficulty we have in accepting it, but once it's there, it's allowed and it's allowable. But that
Right.
always requires that you're willing to turn outside to yourself. And I
Yeah.
think that And there's something innately beautiful about like turning towards others and helping to mitigate and resolve their own suffering, or at
Yeah.
least to just be there with them while they move through it.
Yeah.
Because like if you sit with your own suffering, it's like you nobody would ever wish their own suffering onto anybody else
Yeah.
if they're healthy
Totally.
in some sense.
Totally.
But like when you go through your own suffering, you end up being grateful for it.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm grateful I got to do it, but I wouldn't want that for you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so there's that interesting dynamic where you like you're you allow yourself to turn towards other suffering and to take that on, because taking somebody else's burden somehow feels lightens the load for both of you in that act of
Right.
taking it on.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. Totally. You know, it's interesting. I really appreciate what you're zeroing in on here. Yeah, there's so many examples of that. Like, well, what I'm thinking about is so this kind of this well compassion, right? Like this
Mm.
this that there's something deep on one level, like it's like this because you know compassion, how I understand it is compassion is really different than empathy. Empathy is really
Mm.
specific, right? It's like I
Mm.
don't have empathy for you until I can kind of get in your shoes and then understand the
Mm.
particulars of your situation and who you are, that then I can feel empathy. If I'm missing that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But with compassion, it just that you're suffering at all, right? I don't actually need
Mm.
to know what you're suffering about, like, or even understand it. In fact, I could not understand it, but
Mm.
somehow witnessing your suffering, right? It is, it's like, it's, it's somehow linked. I become permeable to the universality of you and me, a shared
Mm.
kind of humanity. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, there's something about this relational component to it that seems to be essential. Like you're right, it's really difficult from your first person present experience to like know to know what to have compassion to yourself even means, right? Like,
Yeah.
all right, looking from out of my eyes, like from inside of my skin, from like my own subjectivity. All right, love myself. I don't even know what the meat. Where's the joint that you move, right? It's like on some
Yeah.
level. But if I take myself out and look myself as another, and I go,
Mm.
oh, like there's something like, oh, I can, oh, he's doing the best he can. Like da, 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 da. There's something about when I make myself another, right? There's this compassion that can happen,
Mm.
right? But from my
Yeah.
unified sense of self, not relational, right? It's so
Mm.
it doesn't catch or something, or it's very difficult to do. So I would imagine
Yeah.
there's something that goes on in this reversibility that we get, right? When you
Mm.
show compassion to me in that moment, I awaken to everything that all the positions that I can't see myself in that were implicit
Mm.
become explicit through you, and I get a picture of myself through your eyes. And then there's something that like
Mm.
opens there and starts to flow.
Okay. Yeah. 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 Like what came to mind with that, and I feel like this ties in nicely. You brought in that empathy piece, and that like exploded it in some sense.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of a conversation I had with a resident just a couple of days ago. And like you're right. It's like there's like you start off from that place of compassion where it's like I recognize that you're suffering and I'm gonna be here with you. And
Mm.
that's the first piece. And you sit inside of that. And for this particular girl, I spent like 2 weeks spending like hours just talking to her and like trying to get into her world a bit,
Yeah.
until like a couple of days ago, it's like something about it like really clicked, and I just started sobbing, like right there with her. And she was kind of freaked out at first. She's like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
And it's like I just told her, it's like I don't know what it is, but I dropped into where I think you kind of are right now, and it's like this is like I'm feeling it with you now. And but then I stuck there with her, and that was like a big moment for her. I feel like because like she started to get better like pretty soon after that. Like it took a while, but like I think she needed somebody to drop in and be there with her and
Yeah.
be in that direct relationality. Because there's a difference between like the Buddhist universal suffering.
Yeah.
Like you look at somebody and you see, oh, you're suffering, but it's from this universal place, and like
Yes.
where everybody's suffering constantly.
Yeah.
But there's something really direct and specific about bringing that down into, I see you and I see your suffering as you are now.
Yeah.
Now from there, I'm still going to be with you with your uniqueness. Like
Yeah.
it feels like it should be harder in the opposite direction, but there's a sense in which carrying like the universal grief
Yeah.
of humanity is a little bit easier than like sitting there with one person just holding their
Yeah.
hand while they go through it.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
I think like because I'm feeling it's because like you're actually in that relation. You're
Yeah.
not sitting from the outside watching the relationality. You're in it with them and you're playing the other role. And
Yeah.
there's something freeing about that.
Yeah.
And yeah, but like trying to bring that back in for yourself. It's
It's
yeah.
like maybe it's just, it's interesting to think about this because, maybe that's because that's not what we are actually,
Mm.
is this thing over here looking out of my eyes, right? This solipsistic,
Yeah.
right? Interiority, right? Veering upon the world,
Yeah.
occasionally meeting the other and feeling awkward, right? And saying
Mm.
things, hopefully connect, right? Like Bambi on ice or something, right? Like, maybe actually like, this is all indicating that we are actually relational, right? And
Mm.
that there's something deeply restorative, right? Because that's the thing
Mm.
about this, that what you just described, I think is what people mean when they say, I feel deeply seen, right?
Mm.
It's like, there's so much going on there. And it's really it's like, that's a real big, it's one of those mysteries, right? That I'm like, what exactly is that? Right? Because you hear that a
Mm.
lot in circling. There's that experience of people go like, fuck, I was really seen there. And there's something that resolves in that, right? Just like you talked about, like she was stuck or something like that forever. And then you had this experience with her where like you, you kind of got as close as you could get to seeing
Mm.
what she was bearing from her perspective in the way that it occurred for her, right? In such a way that
Mm.
like it was almost like you were her for a moment, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that joining
Mm.
is so kind of existentially relieving, right?
Mm.
I- it's like, and I don't know exactly what's going on there, but the concern I always had was like, well, what's the difference between that, right, and being, say, narcissistically reflected, right? And I was like, that's
Yeah.
when I started to get a little bit of a sense of maybe what's going on by looking at that difference, right? Because narcissistic reflection is usually involves there's there's an image, a reflection that I already kind of know that I'm after. And I'm trying to get you
Mm.
to reflect back to me that I'm lovable or I'm brilliant or I'm special or some version of like
Yeah.
where it is that kind of hungry ghost is after, right? Which lasts for 2 seconds and then you have to move on to the next narcissistic supply and like that
Mm.
narcissistic reification.
Yeah.
It has to do with like it's almost like the one looking for that reflection already knows what the reflection is that they're looking for.
Mm.
But being seen is this different thing, right? It wasn't like you were reflecting her, like on some level. Like it's almost like you were, what is it? It's almost like in that it, it's almost like what in some sense you granted something in that relation, that event
Mm.
of relation, right? That um that somehow disclosed something beyond what she could do on her own, right?
Mm.
Like, but what's strange is you kind of like were able to see her from her vantage point, right? And see how the world in such a way that you could point to it and she got that she was gotten,
Mm.
right? But I think,
Yeah.
but there's something about that exchange that opened something that was beyond anything that she could know to want or reflect,
Mm.
right? But when it was, there's this great relief that happens, right? That usually
Yeah.
affords us some kind of transformative experience.
Yeah. And I think a necessary part of that is that you don't run away screaming once you drop in and you see them from their own self.
Yeah.
Because if you did that, it would like it confirm all the fears, and
Yeah.
then that would be like in the same way that it was like opening and freeing. It
Yeah.
would be like it would be devastating if you like dropped in, you got somebody, and then you're like, oh, never mind, and then you left
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Because I think that what you do is like you're not like you're moving past the presentation,
Yeah.
and you're showing them that there's enough care for me to like keep going and to see what's behind your curtain.
Yeah.
And once I'm there, if I'm able to see that and actually love you even more from that
Yeah.
space, I
Yeah.
think that shows people that like there's a sense in which like they are deeply lovable
Yeah.
because that relationality has expanded all the way, but it didn't disappear. It actually strengthened. And so it's like it's something stable in a whirlpool that they can actually hold on to that grants that solid ground that they're
Right.
able to kind of build off of and from. And even just like internally, like the times like I've felt really seen from people, like that's definitely been the sense where it's like it's surprise and it's wonder and it's curiosity and it's like how did you get in here? Because
Yeah.
I wasn't like I might not even have been saying anything, but you said the thing that's been here,
Mm,
and I feel that you and I are in the same place now, like we're on the same boat. But how did you get there? And it's
yeah.
yeah, it's affording of all these new possibilities because you were seen and loved through the seeing.
Totally. See, you're bringing in something
Yeah.
that I want to trace out. So like you're you're bringing in kind of something that's really cool. So part of it, there's like what you saw, but there's the act that you were like, there's something already communicated in that you reached in to see,
Mm.
right? That was in some sense communicating something that like
Mm.
was, I would imagine it's like you said, yeah, that I would care enough, right?
Mm.
Essentially, I like that I would care enough that to go in and see how you were caring and what you care about. I am
Mm.
innately relationally enacting and showing you that you actually are like,
Yeah, yeah,
and you're intelligible.
yeah. There's like what just came up was a like there was an experience I had with a different friend a couple of months ago, and like we were sitting down, we were eating lunch together, and she had told me something like she was essentially like said that she was in the midst of an existential solipsistic crisis where she like couldn't figure like she felt like nothing was real, that other people weren't actually there, that she was like this the sole consciousness in the universe, and she was getting like she was devastated from like the crushingness of that.
Mm.
And I think I'd actually like just listened to something from you where you were talking about like a practice where you just have people like look at each other's eyes
Yeah. Yeah.
and then be like, okay, now look at them. And then they drop into this new space. And
Yeah.
so, like, with that on my mind, I was like, okay, well, you think that you're the only person in the universe, but look at me
Yeah.
and just like look at my eyes until you feel it. And then after like 30 seconds, she like went, whoa. And, she dropped back into the universe, if you want to say that.
Yeah.
I think it's because of that relationality where it's like, okay, well, if if I'm alone, that means that nothing's real because I didn't do all of this.
Yeah.
But if I can find even like one place of solidity that I can build from, then the entire thing it nucleates and it crystals and it fractals outwards and it allows for the realization of everything else because it has to be relationality all the way down.
Yeah, totally. 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 Yeah, I appreciate this. This is it's kind of yeah, there's that just yeah, there's something like that someone else turns toward and implicitly confirms that there's that which
Mm,
can be turned towards, right? That recognition is like there's something about that that's really deep, right? That's like
mm,
it's like at the level of that I am. It's like it's almost
mm,
prior to what I am or how I am, right? Which are all the things that I
mm.
can talk about, right? That's all the things I can communicate about. I can't actually communicate that I am. Somebody's actually got to like I don't know how like what sense organ
Yeah,
do you perceive that anything is? That's right. Like so like in relation, if someone else like takes their thatness and sees another thatness and
mm,
recognizes it, like on some level, yeah, it's like this deep affirmation, right? And just I'm appreciating that sense of just that you could attempt is demonstrating
mm.
to her, right? That there's this thing that's been gnawing on her. She thought she was like a being. She thought
Yeah,
like there was a valid person here. She thought all of that stuff, and she's been like describing what's and hows and everything like that, but she can't
yeah,
quite point to this thing. And then you come along and you're like, care. And that care,
yeah.
right? Like is this thing that she can't actually on some level probably can't even want it to be reflected. Like
Mm,
it's unreflectable in some way, but it's somehow confirmable or recognizable, right? It's like
mm.
in this deep way. I this it's interesting. More I'm appreciating what you're saying about this. This is kind of elucidating some of the things about that. I'm like, what is that? Being deeply seen. That's so gratifying. That's really hard to describe, right? Because I've never
Yeah,
been satisfied with my descriptions of what that is. It's like the feeling is so much more so is always so much the feeling is almost so much more voluptuous than the descriptions of
mm.
what's going on with that, right? I feel like we've touched a
Yeah,
little bit on that. I appreciate that a lot.
yeah. Thank you. This is a yeah. It really exploded in the coolest way,
Yeah.
and yeah, like the feeling I get from talking about it is actually like you brought in this image of like I don't think you were saying it, but like there was this like you were talking about the world from like her perspective, and it's like it's just like this building this increasing franticness.
Yeah.
But then there's like that hand that comes from the outside and just like very gently, just and by like just like the simplest touch, just calms that entire system down.
Yeah.
And it's that's whatever that thing is from the outside that just brings everything down to rest. It's like I felt that like I felt that like in my shoulders, like in my in my chest, like I felt that
Yeah.
and yeah, whatever that feeling is, it's like you can't put into word like it's very difficult to put into words a kind of existential relief that comes from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. It's funny. I just got this picture like that came like or sense it just came to me in this thing that's being elucidated right now of like one of the things I've really appreciate, right, with my relationship with my wife is that there's there's um there's something that we're inside of that is that I think it's called our relationship, right, in some way, but
Mm,
it's a thing that has a there-ness quality to it. In other words, it's like
mm,
something that we're not producing, right? It's not the end
mm,
result of a production that we need to produce, there's something
Mm.
that when we sit together and we sit on the couch, we don't have to say anything, we don't have to do something, and I can feel the presence of, I think it's that quality of that. There's the presence of our
Mm.
relationship, and we could like talk about something deep, we could talk about something stupid, we could not say anything at all,
Yeah.
and there's something that precedes all of that, right? And goes beyond all of that somehow, called our relation. And it's funny because
Mm.
I think that there's, in some sense, with that relation, um, part of what allowed that relation to come into being is this kind of all those all those historical moments of that shared recognition of each other, right?
Mm.
Like, usually from not recognizing it and like fucking spinning out and like and then recognizing it and like all the stuff you go through in a relationship, right?
Yeah.
All those moments of like mutual recognition, right? Started to become like in some sense an actual kind of presence that preceded us and that we can
Mm.
hang out in. And that kind of sense of being able to like, to be silent with one another and still be in deep contact, right? To
Mm.
not have to produce anything in order to make contact, but there's a contactfulness that's already given, right?
Mm.
I think has something to do with what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to ask you more about that because, I got married pretty recently,
Mhm.
and yeah, the person I married, her name's Bailey, and like
Mm.
that was like right before I met her, I went on like somewhat of a serial dating spree,
Yeah.
and like I was looking for something, but it's that eros. It's like that I couldn't have ever put my like a name on what the thing was that I was looking for. All I knew is I wasn't finding it
Yeah.
until I met her, and like we were just talking about this today, and it's like the feeling was that she was real. She was a real person, and everything kind of just expanded from there.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I'm feeling into what you're saying about like you can like we can be sitting doing completely different things,
Yeah.
and but somehow like you're inside of that same boat together,
Yeah.
that your relationship.
Yeah.
And yeah, but like I'm curious to hear from you because you've been married and together for a lot longer than I have. Like
Yeah.
what does that look like after? Like how does that change over years and decades?
Um, well, I think a couple of things that you said of like what struck me is when he said, "Oh, oh, that's what I was looking for," right? Like you remembered it once you saw her, is like she's real. And another way of saying that I would imagine is like she's really other. Like there's something about her.
Yeah, yeah,
I can never make subject of me. Like there's something over there that will continually be other, right? That
yeah,
announces itself and makes it obvious enough to this one over here, right? Such that a relation can happen, right?
yeah.
Because it's like if there's no difference, there's no relation, right? And like
Mm.
intimacy is this really, really paradoxical thing, right? It's like it goes all the way down to the philosophical notion of like the mystery of the one and the many, right? The whole there's beings one,
Mm.
but how come there's many then? Well, then if
Yeah.
you don't know it's many, but then how come it's unified? Like this
Yeah.
thing, right? And I think intimacy really embodies that fundamental. I mean, this is probably one of the reasons why, um, in the kind of Christian cosmology, the marriage was a symbol of the cosmos, right?
Mm.
Like there's something deeply symbolic going on, with that. But there's this kind of
Mm.
way where our unity, right, is really banking on like that there's a fundamental difference between you and I, but there's some way that difference both draws us
Mm.
in and unifies us, but in that unity distinguishes the difference that draws us in, right?
Mm.
And I think the way that that's like embodied in moments of intimacy, and these are why like you could say it's so strange even when you think about this, because you think about like moments of intimacy are it's like there's a lot of things, but one thing it isn't is safe, right? Because it's
Yeah.
usually right like what's weird is it produces all of this real safety, right? It through those
Yeah.
moments,
Yeah.
right? It produces the safety in this kind of sense, right? But like I think what you're doing when you're in a moment like, and this is how you kind of discover each other, right? In this way, it's like
Mhm.
you have the like to be a human being is to be this paradox, right? Where on one level, I'm 100% driven towards closeness and belonging,
Mhm.
right? And and find security in that and want infinite security in that. And like there's like I'm so
Mhm.
driven at so many different levels, right? My whole being is oriented that
Yeah.
way. And at the very same time, 100% of me is driven towards autonomy, wants to stand out
Mhm.
in my uniqueness and my difference and have that difference seen in a way that's and contribute to that, right? So both of those things are like going on at the same time, right? And
Yeah.
and so usually moments of like initiating what initiates intimacy is where I'm at a point in the relationship where all of a sudden, if I say what's real for me, I look over at you and it looks like I may lose you. You know,
Yeah.
not think about this, not
Yeah.
think about this. Oh, well, I don't want to lose you, so I won't say it. But wait a minute. If I don't say it, then I lose me. Hang on a second. Okay, so I'll say it.
Yeah.
If I say it, I'll lose dun 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 dun, dun right. You know what that's called? Anxiety. And, and it's like,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because it's really strange. Like this is why I think in kind of family systems thinking they talk about like intimacy inherently involves anxiety tolerance. Like if you can't,
Mhm.
if you try to move away from the anxiety, you move away from intimacy, right? And you move away
Mhm.
from it like through either dominating, right, and
Yeah.
taking over everything, or submitting, giving up everything, or just dissociating, or they say stay and grow. And what's
Mhm.
fascinating to me about moments of intimacy is like it's like so you say it and you say it in a way that turn towards the other. You present difference and you show your
Mhm.
difference, but you do it in a way that turns towards the other. And it creates this opportunity that if the other one can turn towards you, right? It's
Mhm.
this space that like it's strange. It's like it instantly gets you in new territory,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because all of my fears, I think about those fears of like going into that conversation. There's all my fears about it, right? There's what I want to have happen. There's all, but my view at that point is inside of a horizon, right? That
Mhm.
that that I'm not at once I say it. Once I say it, that I'm at a
Mhm.
different horizon. And so then it ends up
Yeah.
happening, I don't know how many times. I remember some of the most intimate moments I've had are moments when I've showed up and said, like, listen, I think I'm done. Right. That was the most honest thing I could say is like, we're done. Right. And just really said it and really was with it. And that me saying that revealed something to her about me that had her awaken to something that had me realize, oh, actually,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't even know that I wanted this thing that you're now sharing with me. And, and I'm in a whole new universe, right? With a whole different law of physics,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. It's like the mental image that came up was like two mirrors
Yeah.
where they're like each like reflecting their own thing.
Yeah.
But when you like face them against each other, they start reflecting back and forth. And then
Yeah.
there's this, like you're looking down this new tunnel that
Yeah.
just emerged between the two of them. And then you're inside of that all of a sudden.
Totally. Totally.
And
Yeah. Yeah. And
yeah.
it's those moments, right, where I think over time that that illumination that you see over there, that like, well, that's truly real, that's other, right? That you can't consume or withdraw from, or right, is the
Mm.
thing that just becomes, I think, more and more and more and more articulated over time, right?
Mm.
But I'd say that with me, like, I mean, there's a lot to this, right? There's a lot to this in my relationship with Brienne, but like, I would say that when there was relationship one with her and there was relationship two with her, right?
Mm.
And what I would say relationship was one was, and this has a lot to do with my upbringing and like my own blind spots and stuff like that. But like, and I couldn't appreciate the bond. I couldn't see the bond. I never understood what a bond was at some deep visceral level. And therefore I couldn't relate with it in any conscious
Mm.
way. And so there was this constant dynamic that we were getting into, right? And then there was a period where we had split up and then we got back together. And the second period, right, is a real different thing. Because at some point
Yeah.
I started, I think, what started to become present for me was on one level, I was like in a relationship with her.
Mm.
And at at another level, I was in a relationship with us. And it was that
Mm.
us that I felt like I started to kind of become servant to, right? That
Mm.
sense of
Yeah.
that there's a bond here that happens with one other person, at least with me, it's just with one other person, right?
Mm.
And that with that particular, like with one other person is the only place that I'm gonna have this law of physics to with. And
Yeah.
once I could feel that, and it's so interesting because that was such a it was such a non-intellectual experience. It was so
Mm.
like I felt like I found the place to sit such that I could feel that bond and then value it and devote to it. And it was
Mm.
effortless to do that, right? When that happened, that's when everything started to really sink into place with us. I noticed,
Mm.
right? Of like it was kind of like it was like marrying the marriage or something, right?
Mm.
Like
Yeah.
not just marrying her, but marrying us in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, yeah, like what came to mind is that we, like Bailey, that we started doing this thing kind of like not on purpose, but like we found ourselves like in this pattern where like we'd have an argument or we'd have like a really intense conversation about something. And like immediately after like we had like come to a resolution where we both felt good about everything we had talked about, we'd like immediately go back and replay the entire conversation together,
Yeah.
sharing like from the inside. It's like, oh well, when you said this, this is what showed up, and this is why I responded that way.
Yeah.
And I think that like the that kind of mirrors almost that relationship one versus two dynamic because we had something similar where you know you go through the first time and it's like it's me and you and we're trying to figure this thing out
Yeah.
and but then you come back to that and you look at it from from that higher perspective and you're looking at it again and you do that part together and so it's the unification, it's the two of you
Yeah.
figuring the two of you out instead of two of you figuring one thing out, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. Yeah, that totally makes sense. That totally makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's
And that's the thing about it. Like there's this yeah, when I look at her, there's I it's something it's interesting. And when I like for example, when I look at my son, it's like it doesn't take very much time where I'm like kind of reach this point where I can't get underneath this. I can't get like there's just boy, there he's there. There's this who here.
yeah.
And this who wasn't here at one point. And I think in some sense being a parent is like you're really present to their non-existence, right? and
Mm.
then they exist through that non having not existed, that just
Mm.
you're like there's some, it's like meaning itself shines forth and you can just viscerally feel it. And with her, there really is this kind of, there is this sense, it's not exactly like that, it's more like there's something, yeah, it's like looking in her eyes, there is something about Brienne that's so Brienne, like
Mm.
that, like is so fucking clearly, concretely an eminent being in front of me, but at the same
Mm.
time, there's something I can't totally grasp or conceptualize, right?
Yeah.
Like, and somehow her concreteness displays it in every single feature of her, right? That makes
Yeah.
something just blatantly more and more obvious. But at the same time,
Mm.
I can't grasp this. Who, there's something that recedes, right? That's
Mm.
inexhaustible. That gets really present at like one moment, right? And there is a
Mm.
sense of getting to know her where that's actually gotten more and more and more and more. Like on one level,
Mm.
she's stranger to me than she was, 10 years ago. At some level, it's hard to describe.
There's a dream I had a while ago where like the first part of the dream was, just like crazy adventure, like whatever was going on, like, there was like a car chase, like we're like trying to reach a goal of some kind. And like at the very end of that, there was like a huge car crash and I died. And from the dream, like I like from death, like I like looked back down at my hands and I was, one of those like cosmic beings where you see the entire universe like inside your body.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, whoa, that was a crazy ride. Like
Yeah.
that was a fun little adventure I just went on.
Yeah.
And I immediately felt really lonely looking back in at myself.
Huh.
Kind of the like Alan Watts had that talk where he's like, if you could like if you were God, you'd have no choice but to dream a dream.
Yeah.
Like dream like more and more outlandish dreams just to keep yourself interested.
Yeah.
You have to keep forgetting that you're God.
Yeah.
And I felt that and I was like, I gotta go and do that again because being here by myself kind of sucks.
Yeah.
Until I just looked up and then I saw Bailey in that same kind of in that same kind of personage, that universal being. And the immediate thought was like, it was tremendous relief. And it was like oh, that's the point. That's what I was doing all this for.
Yeah.
And then I woke up back in, this world and then just gave her a big old kiss. And it was
Uh,
yeah,
yeah.
that was I feel like that it was really instructive. It
Yeah.
was it was more relieving than you being God that's having his own dreams every night because
Yeah.
it's you don't even have to do that because you got somebody else there that's there that can do it with you and
Yeah.
that's on that same adventure with you and that was
Yeah. Totally.
yeah.
Yeah. It's got to have that. Like, it's funny. It's like that. It's, it's fun. And this is interesting because it's like, this is where, like, if there's no desire, right? There's hard to say that
Mm.
there's relationship. Like, relationship on some level requires desire, but desire points to something not here, right? It points
Mm.
to something not, right? Something withdrawals, right? And that is, without that, right? There is no
Mm.
relationality, right? In some sense. And the moment,
Yeah.
like, this is why it's really important to like have intimate conversations, right? Because in some sense
Mm.
you a relation could deaden and die and all of that kind of stuff, right? Because in some sense you lose the
Yeah.
non-here-ness, right? The withdrawal, the mystery of it, right? But the moment
Mm.
you awaken to that, there's a relation here, and that relation is how we become in some way through each other in this big way. Yeah, this is like
Yeah.
this being as pure relation is just really striking.
It's
It's
it
also
crystallizes.
assaulting to my
Yeah.
atomistic sense of myself. It's really insulting to it.
It's really annoying, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. Hey, this is really great, my friend. I'm really enjoying talking with you. I probably need to start
Yeah,
wrapping
me
up.
too. Yeah, because we've been talking for like, yeah, almost 2 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is great. We never got to talk about your geometric practice, but that
Oh yeah.
gives us an excuse to talk again.
I'm always willing to look for an excuse to talk to you again, guy. So
Right on, my friend.
awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I'm feeling, yeah, feeling more whole, more real. So really appreciate that. Appreciate you.
Me too. Thanks for helping me hear the W
Of
in the
course.
whole.
Appreciate you guys.
Yeah. Bye.